Hi there, this video is about the Macintosh IIvi computer. Now you can be forgiven if you've never heard of one of these, and that's because they were never sold in the US. They were sold in South America, they were sold in Europe, they were sold in Japan and here in Australia. They were released in October 1992. There was a faster version, which was the Macintosh IIVX. This IIvi had a 16 megahertz 68030 CPU and no floating point unit, or FPU. It had a 16 megahertz bus speed. The IIVX, which was the faster version that came out at the same time, it was a 32 megahertz 030 CPU, and it had a floating point unit. So anyhow, this particular model was never particularly popular, and it was discontinued only 4 months after it was released, which is one of the shortest runs of any Macintosh computer. And that's because it wasn't particularly popular. I mean, it didn't really have much of a place in the Macintosh lineup. By this stage, there were already 68040 computers available. There were, sort of things like the Quadra 900, the big workhorses. And then there was also the entry-level computer, the LC2, which actually had exactly the same speed, CPU and bus speed as this computer. So if you've got the LC2 as the entry level, and then you've got the more powerful computers like the 68040s, you sort of have to wonder what place did this computer have. And one of the things this did have was a built-in CD-ROM drive, and it was the first Mac to do that. Now, it was an optional extra, and this particular model doesn't have that, so that's where it would have sat, just there. So that was the main selling point of this computer. But when you consider that the Macintosh IIci, which came out in 1989, had a 25 megahertz 68030, and this one is only a 16 megahertz. So this computer is 3 years newer than a IIci, but it's slower. So for that reason, this computer was doomed to failure. Now, what it does have is it does have some expandability. It's got 3 new bus slots for putting in new bus cards. It's got a processor direct slot, so you can put accelerators and whatnot in there. It has 4 RAM slots. It's got 4 megabytes of onboard RAM. It's got 4 RAM slots. It's expandable up to 68 megabytes of RAM, and it's got a couple of VRAM slots in there as well. So anyhow, I think I've done enough sort of slagging off this particular model now. So now I'm just going to tell you about this particular one I have in front of me. Now, I bought this one on eBay, pretty cheap, and this particular computer has a secret. And the secret that this computer has can be revealed if I lift it up and show you the underside. And that dark spot there is a big blob of rust, and that's been caused by a leaky PRAM battery. It's basically leaked out its gunk, and that's corroded the board and gone right through to the bottom case and caused rust there. So this video is to have a closer look, see if it's something that can be repaired, and if so, I will repair it, and hopefully by the end of the video I'll be firing it up and installing a system on it. So let's have a little look inside. So there we have, there's obviously the floppy drive there. That's where a hard drive would be if it was there, and it's not. And that's where a CD-ROM drive would be if it was there, and it's not. And there's your power supply there. And we will have a look inside and just see exactly how bad it is. Okay, so I've taken out the power supply, and I've also taken out the cage that was holding the power supply and the hard drives and all that in place, and just revealing the board. Now, if we go and have a look here, that is the residue of the leaky battery, and that's gone right through that hole there and into, sorry about the lack of focus there, right through that hole there, and that's where it's affecting the other side of the board. And if we have a look around here, You might also see this kind of greasy look on the board, and that's been caused from capacitor leakage from these surface mount electrolytic capacitors, which I will replace as part of this restoration job. So they are going to go. We've got a couple more there. We've got one little guy there. So all of those capacitors are going to be replaced because they will all have leaked by now, and so they will be no good. Nice bit of corrosion there on the, or a little bit of rust on the surface of that crystal. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this board out, and I'm going to have a look on the other side, because the damage is not too bad on this side, but I'm a little bit scared about what it's going to look like on the other side. Okay, well, the board's been taken out, and as you can see, the case seems to be the thing that's taken the brunt of the damage, with a lovely big rusty sort of glob there. So I'm going to need to clean that right up and then probably get a bit of rust converter on it. It's never going to be the same again, but I can at least try and stop it from getting any worse. But the good thing is the underside of the board doesn't actually look too bad at all. This is the hole where all of the goop was leaking out. And we've got a little bit of corrosion happening around some of those pins there. Some of those little vias, but really not looking too bad at all. I'm feeling pretty optimistic about this one. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the battery holder off completely. I'm just going to lift that off, just get rid of that entirely. Then I'm going to give the whole board I'll take all of the old capacitors off. Then I'm going to give the board a really good clean and just have a look under the microscope just how bad it is. Alright, so I'm looking at the IIvi logic board under the microscope at the moment, and it's not too bad. I've just taken off the battery holder, and that's the first pin of the battery holder, and that is the second, and they're a little bit on the messy side, but I do think I'm going to be able to bring those back to life. There's all this rust on here, but as far as I can see, that's actually just sitting on top and hasn't actually done any damage to these traces underneath. See, that's just coming off there, and I think we'll probably be fairly safe under it. I may need to repair one or two traces, but it's certainly not as bad as it could be. I'll get at this with a toothbrush in a moment. Yeah. Okay, so let's have a look across here. Okay, so remember I talked to you before about these electrolytic capacitors. Well, as you can see, their leakage has caused quite a bit of nastiness going on around here. That's this green that you see around here, that's all corrosion from the capacitor leakage, and there's quite a bit of that going on all around here. I mean, look at that. That's just awful. Yuck. Having said that, I will be putting this through an ultrasonic cleaner, and they do work wonders getting a lot of this sort of corrosion off. And more importantly, they then reveal what you've got left behind and whether we need to do any sort of repairs on that stuff. So I'm going to I think probably whip off these capacitors. I'm probably going to replace the capacitors while I'm at it, because there's not that many, so I may as well do that before I put it in the cleaner, and then I'll have a look at it once it's out of the cleaner, and we can see you know, just how bad things really are. Okay, so this is the region of the board that we were looking at before that was covered in the rust. That's one of the holes from the battery holder, and that's the other hole from the battery holder there. And this is all that area that had all that caked on rust. Now that's all been sort of removed with a combination of, you know, a bit of manual labour and with the ultrasonic cleaner. At the end of that, I basically had everything intact with the exception of one trace, which was corroded right the way through. So I have now replaced that with a little piece of wire running across there, as you can see. It's one of the one of the wires coming from the RAM, so obviously a fairly important one. Would probably work fine if it was running off the internal RAM, but obviously as soon as I stick a RAM sim in there, it's likely to stuff up. But I would like to also show you some of those other areas around, sort of closer to the top of the board. As you can see, the ultrasonic cleaning has tidied a lot of these areas up quite well. So I've got my my new capacitors in place. Sorry, this board's a bit bulky. I've got my new capacitor. There's one new capacitor there, and you know, there's still a little bit of this sort of this kind of residual chunkiness here, this kind of crunchy stuff. But I'll be honest, I'm not overly concerned about that. It does look like it's still making contact. I don't think we'll have any issues with continuity on those, so I think we'll be fine. Then we've got, zipping along here, there's another two capacitors here. These are the new capacitors that I've replaced. And around here again, this is some of this area where we had some pretty bad corrosion around these here and around these, and this one here, this was one of the ones that I showed before. This one was all covered in green before, and as you can see, a little bit of residual green there, but all of these legs, even though there's a bit of rust on some of them, they all look like they're intact. I'm not sure about those. I mean, again, they're probably okay. I'll have a look at those at an angle a little bit later. Got a bit more green going on here, but once again, I do feel like all these things will still be making contact even though they are green, so I'm feeling fairly confident that it will work. I've replaced these axial capacitors as well, and there's the last two of these two little capacitors down here. Again, these will all be replaced. I'll just have a quick look at the CPU because that was looking pretty poor as well. Yeah, that seems to be okay. No broken legs, no broken pins on these, so I think that's all pretty good. So next thing I'm going to do is give it some power and see what it does. Okay, so right while I was in the middle of congratulating myself about how awesomely clean this board came up, I then started to notice a few instances of this. So this is all around that same region, that area up here where I've had that repaired trace. So this is all a result of corrosion from that battery leakage. Now what I've got here is a trace leading to a via that goes through to the other side of the board. Now if I zoom right into this, and then bear with me, just let me get some focus on this, you will notice, or not, we'll see how well you can see this, it's not the best vision I'm afraid, that what has happened, there is supposed to be a ring of copper around here which makes contact with a little like tube that goes through to the other side, carries the electricity through to the other side of the board. Well, what I've found in several instances along here is that little copper ring around the outside has gone, or if it hasn't gone, it's at least got to the point where it's not touching that ring. Yep, here's another one. Yep, where it's not actually touching that ring, it's broken away, where there's not enough copper there, and it's actually broken away from that ring, so we're not getting contact between that and the ring below. So I've got a few to repair here. There's another one where I need to basically run a wire across here, then through that hole out the other side to make sure that I am joining all of these back up again. So I've got a little bit of work to do here with those, but I am, fingers crossed, hoping that that's all that needs to be done. So I'm going to go work my way through those now, and then we'll see what happens. Okay, so this is the
this is the board after I finished all my repairs. And you can see all along here, these are all my little trace repairs. So that's the wire going through there, and another one going through there. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 I think was the total that needed to be repaired. And if I flip the board over, sorry about that, flip, and look at the same region under here, you can see that's the wires coming through the other side. And I'll just maybe zoom in onto this. You can see the wires coming through there, and then soldered onto the trace on the other side. So that's re-establishing those connections from those damaged vias. I used slightly thicker wire for these ones because these, as you can see, are a thicker trace. But with the others, it just obviously the wire that would fit through the little hole there. So that's basically it. The next step now I need is to coat these with some solder mask. So this is UV curable solder mask, and what that will do is that will protect all these repairs. So it's just painting some down there. Protect all these repairs from damage or future corrosion, because it keep the oxygen away so that the any exposed metals can't oxidize. And look, it might look a little bit ugly, but we're zoomed in pretty close here. Once this is all finished, you'll barely even notice these. So I'll paint this on, and then I'll leave it out in the sun to cure, get a bit of UV on it. I have a little UV globe in here, but it's a nice sunny day outside, so I think I'll take advantage of the free UV coming from the sky. And then once that is all cured, I will then go and plug it into a power supply, and we'll see if all of this was worth the effort. Okay, so here's the finished board, all cleaned up, repaired, hopefully. Here's the really bad section from that battery leakage. I haven't replaced the battery holder yet, and that's because I want to test it out and see that it all works before I stick a battery holder on top of this area, which has had all the repairs. If I need to do any further repair, I don't want to have to take the battery holder off again. So I'm going to test it first, and if it all works, then I'll put a new battery holder on there. So that's as I say, that's now with the UV mask on it, and as you can see, it's not particularly noticeable. I mean, you can see the little green blobs there, but it's reasonably inconspicuous. And at the end of the day, when this is all inside, who's going to care anyway, as long as it works? And there's the areas there where we've had some replacement capacitors. So let's just have a little look now at the comparison between what it looked like before and what it looks like now, and just outline a few of the things that I have done. So I have obviously removed the battery holder and repaired the damage traces from the rust. I have replaced 6 surface mount electrolytic capacitors. They're now been replaced with tantalums, and I have replaced 2 of the axial electrolytic capacitors, and I have also added a 68882 floating point unit, or FPU. This, even though this one didn't originally come with an FPU, it does have an empty socket for it, and I have quite a few spare FPU chips lying around, so I popped one in. So that's pretty much it for the board. Now we'll start the reassembly process. So I have sanded off all of the rusty stuff from the bottom of the case, both on the inside and the outside. that's exposed back to the bare metal, so I'm going to need to put some sort of, you know, primer and maybe a rust blocker onto there to stop that rust from reoccurring. But as you can see, I mean, when you consider how that looked before, it's not bad at all, and there's still lots and lots of good metal there, so it's not like there's going to be any risk to the strength of the structure. So the next thing I'm going to do now is put the board in, and then I will go through the process of putting the cage back in, and then we'll see if it's all been worthwhile. Okay, so the board is now firmly in place. I've put in some RAM, I've put in the VRAM, connected up the speaker. Now the next thing, I have to put this cage in. And this is a pretty straightforward process. There's a little piece of metal that sort of comes out as an L shape there, and a little hook here. And they go into a little slot there and a slot there. So while it's up at this sort of angle, you feed the little tip of that L shape into that slot, which can be, there we go, that's in, and then the little hook in there, and then we just bring that down, and that just rolls down into place, but in there and then in there. Okay, so that's all in place now, and then we just have a couple of screws. One goes here and one goes here. You can't see that, that's one just goes down here, like that. Okay, so that's basically the cage in place. I've now got my floppy cable here. I'm going to put that into the plug for the floppy just there, like that. So now the floppy's plugged in. And the power supply is pretty straightforward. It's just got a little sort of Molex plug there, and then there's a plug hole for it down there, and so that you just line those up, and then it just slides into place like that, and plug, if we spin that around, it's not going to be easy to see, but that plug just slots into the plug hole in there, and then there is actually a screw which goes in the back here, just into here, which holds that power supply in place, like that. And that's pretty much it. Now, I've obviously also got to connect up a hard drive. Now, this is the ribbon cable. This plugs into the little plug hole here above the floppy plug hole. And that's just going to go through there. In you go. There you go. Okay, now obviously, as I mentioned before, I have no hard drive, but what I do have is a SCSI 2SD version 5, and I on another computer I've already actually loaded up System 7.1 for this computer. It's actually the IIvi specific system installation. So if I connect this up, and we've got that there. Now I need to create some sort of mounting bracket for this, but in the meantime I'll just plonk that there. I'm going to put on a bit of plastic so that we don't accidentally touch any of these contacts onto that metal. And then this is the power supply, which again, a little Molex plug that goes into the board, and then that plug you would obviously have one going here to the CD if it was here, and this one then going to the hard drive. Now, as it turns out, these SCSI 2SDs don't need any additional power. They can get all the power they need out of the SCSI bus itself. So, but well, no harm in plugging it in. Just that way everything has its place. So now that everything's in place, I'm going to connect up a keyboard and a monitor, and then I'm going to press the button. Okay, so I've got a keyboard and a monitor set up, and I am connected up to power. So I'm about to press the power button on the keyboard, and we'll see what happens. Fingers crossed. There's a lovely chime, and there's some screen, and oh, I think Yep, I've got a, oh, look at that. Yep, there we go. Well, startup disk will not work on this Macintosh model. Use the latest installer to update this disk for this model. System 7.1 does not work on this model. You need a new version that does. Well, that's interesting. It's saying that System 7.1 doesn't work on this model because apparently that's the version of system that came with it. So I am now going to see if I can track down a system that does work on it. Okay, so here I am back at the proverbial drawing board. Basically, after having that initial issue with System 7.1 not loading up, I then installed System 7.5, but I kept on getting an unimplemented trap error. Which is, you would normally hold down, restart with the extensions off, because the unimplemented trap is usually a memory addressing issue, and you would normally blame it on a system extension or a clash of system extensions or something like that. But this was a fresh system with, no extensions, and so it led me to think it was probably a memory error. So the one part of this board that I couldn't see was underneath the SIM slot holder. Little memory SIM slot holder, so I thought I'd take that off, which is an absolute nightmare, by the way. But once I got it off, it revealed this. A couple of lovely big trace breaks. So there's a break and a trace goes from here to here, and then there's a break that goes from here through this hole and onto the other side of the board. Now I figured I may as well do this repair sort of for the camera, and so what I do is I use some incredibly fine wire, which the sort of wire that you use for wrapping a transformer or an electromagnet. It's enameled. It looks like this, and even though it's enameled, so it's insulated, applying a little bit of heat to the end just makes that enamel come straight off. So if I just get this here and just melt it, you'll see that the solder is actually stuck to that. So I'm just going to get some tweezers here and hold this in place. I'll put a bit of flux onto this here, and then I'm just going to hold this in place and just make sure I get that all nice and, sorry about the wobbling hands here, that's they don't wobble that much, but when it's under the microscope it really looks like I'm wobbling like crazy. Okay, so that's on there quite well, I'm happy with that. Then I'm going to get some flux here onto the other side. Make sure I've got a little bit of solder on the end of my soldering iron. I'm using a massive tip on this at the moment. I would normally use a smaller tip, but I couldn't really be bothered changing it over. Hold that into place there and melt that there. Okay, so that there is a join. I'm now going to just get a blade here and just apply the gentlest amount of pressure to just then make that, so I can just give him a little bit of a wobble and he'll come off. Yeah, come on, don't make a liar of me. Oh, it needs more resistance here. I don't want to pull too hard because I don't want to tear any of these traces off. Okay, so that's a nice join there. I'll just give it a bit of a push to make sure that he's connected, and he is. Now the next one is I need to repair this one that goes through to the other side. And for that, I'm going to poke him through. Poke a little bit of wire through this hole. I hope he goes through. Hope there's no blockage on the way through. Through to the other side, look at that. Okay, so he's through to the other side. I then just need to, and what I may end up doing is do the other side first. Okay. And where is he coming? Oh, he hasn't come through. He should be coming through there, but he hasn't come through all the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to poke it through from the other side. So let's grab another piece of wire, and I will poke through. Oop. This wire is so thin, you can't even tell if you're holding it. Come on, through you go. All right. Yeah. Come on, we can do it. Here we go. Oh, look at that, very satisfying, straight through. There we go. through. I want to make sure I've got plenty on the other side because I've got to go a reasonable distance. Okay, so I'm just going to bend that down now, like that. And once again, great big glob of, I apologise, the focus is a little bit out, great big glob, I've got to go grabbing my flux syringes. Okay, a bit of flux on there, and then just melt some solder. Okay, that's on there, and I'll just trim that because I really don't like the look of this joint here. The trace is lifting off the board. I will need to put some sort of protection on that. There we go. I'll put some of that UV solder mask on it to make it stronger. Right, and then let's have a look at the other side. This is now poking through the other side. Where is it? There it is. Okay. This is my old wire from before. I'll just get rid of that. Okay. Alright. So, it's hard to see here, but the wire is here. It's just out of focus. So let me just bring that down. And then I'm just going to expose a little bit more of this trace here for me to join onto. Like that. Then I'm just going to bend that down, applying some pressure but not too much. I want it to be tight, but I don't want to tear anything. Okay, so again, nice big gob of flux. If you're ever wondering to know what flux is and what its purpose is, I've got a beginner's guide to soldering video on my channel. Please feel free to have a look at it. I go into all of the theory behind the purpose of flux and what it does when you're soldering. There we go. So just applying a little bit of pressure to that. Whoop. I need a little bit more flux there because, as you can see, it's starting to, the solder is starting to go streaky. Okay, let's hold this into place. Yep. Yep. Oh, God. This one's terrible. Doing an awful job with this one. I apologise. Apologise profusely for how awful this looks. Flux. I will be happy with it soon. Promise. Oh, that'll do. That'll do. It's not my prettiest, but it is together. And I'll just cut that off. Right, so there we have. Let's get a little bit of isopropyl alcohol here to just clean it off a little bit so you can see. And so we've got one trace repair going along here through the hole and then attaching on the other side where it's supposed to attach, and then we've got one going along there, joining those two together. And that's basically it. So I am hopeful that that is the reason for the unimplemented trap errors I was getting before. I will put the RAM slot thingy back on, and then I'm going to test it out and we'll hope for the best. Okay, so the Macintosh IIvi is all back together again, and the last two trace repairs resolved the issue with the unimplemented trap error. It also solved the mystery as to why it wouldn't boot into System 7.1. And this is now loaded up with System 7.1 and is about to boot into it. And any moment now, we will get a happy face and we'll get to welcome to Macintosh. I've put in 4 4MB SIMs, so there's 16 megabytes of RAM installed plus the 4 on board, so this has got 20 megabytes of RAM installed. I've also put in a battery holder, so it's now got a PRAM battery in there. And then if we go up to the Apple menu and about this Macintosh, you'll see the Macintosh IIvi with 20 megabytes of RAM. So
So that's basically it. The computer has been repaired. Now, of course, you may well be asking yourself the question, why bother with a computer which is regarded by some as a complete lemon? Well, from my perspective, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, I don't like to see any old computer that's not working if it's one that I think I can fix up. But the other is that the IIvi it's probably a computer that Apple would probably prefer to forget ever existed. And to some extent that makes it a little bit sort of collectible to me. I mean, it was one that, didn't get a worldwide release. It was, never particularly popular, and it was discontinued, sort of within 4 months. So for me, that actually makes it, a bit of a collectible. And of course, the other thing is that it was one of the first models to come in this shape box, which of course then all of the, a lot of the Quadras and everything further down the track, they came out in this exact same case. So again, it has some historical significance there as well. But other than that, I just like to collect old Macs. So I hope you've enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.